Happy birthday, loser. My older sister, Sloane, smiled as she said it. Then, without the slightest warning, she shoved me with both hands. I stumbled backward and crashed face first into my own birthday cake. Cold blueberry buttercream exploded across my face. Thick frosting covered my hair, my eyes, and the front of my brand-new custom-made silk dress that had cost thousands of dollars. The cake stand hit the floor with a deafening crash as blue frosting splattered across the dining room. The entire room froze. No one moved. No one spoke. Then Sloane looked down at me, folded her arms, and smirked. "Now you finally look like the trash you really are." The room erupted with laughter. The loudest laugh came from my own mother. Coraline didn't tell her to apologize. She didn't ask if I was hurt. Instead, she wiped tears from her eyes from laughing so hard and said, "Honestly, Sloane just saved us from pretending you belong in that dress." That was the moment something inside me died. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply smiled. Because while everyone else thought I'd been humiliated, I had just made a decision. That night, while my sister slept peacefully, I permanently canceled the unlimited emergency credit card I'd been secretly paying for over the last 6 years. She never even knew the account existed because she had never bothered to ask who was footing the bill. But that wasn't the real surprise. At exactly 8:40 the next morning, Sloane walked outside with her morning coffee and let out a scream so loud the neighbors came running. Her beloved brand new $95,000 Range Rover was gone. Not stolen. Not repossessed by mistake. Taken by the only person who had legally paid every single dollar for it. Me. And what happened over the next few hours destroyed the fake empire my family had spent years building on my silence. If you want to understand why I smiled after being shoved into my own birthday cake instead of fighting back, you have to understand what my family had been doing to me for the last 10 years. My name is Maeve. I'm 32 years old, and for an entire decade, I was my family's invisible daughter, permanent scapegoat, and personal ATM, professionally. I was the senior executive director of enterprise technology at one of the largest corporations in the country. I negotiated multi-million-dollar software contracts, managed teams across multiple states, and spent my days making decisions that moved hundreds of millions of dollars. My office occupied a corner suite on the 50th floor, and my income was more than enough to give me every luxury I could ever want. But outside the office, I lived as quietly as possible. My home was comfortable but modest. I drove a reliable 5-year-old mid-size sedan. I wore simple clothes, almost no jewelry, and never felt the need to advertise my success. My family mistook my humility for weakness. That misunderstanding would become the most expensive mistake of their lives. I kept my extreme financial success entirely hidden from my family for one simple reason. I knew them. I knew that if my older sister Sloane found out how much money I really had, her constant begging for small emergency loans would instantly mutate into demands for a permanent payroll. Sloane and her husband Weston cared about one thing and one thing only: the illusion of extreme wealth. If a neighbor bought a new luxury grill, Weston suddenly needed an outdoor kitchen, even though his credit score was absolute garbage. If the rich moms at Kale's expensive private school bought designer bags, Sloane magically needed the exact same one, even while collection agencies were calling her cell phone nonstop. But my total silence about my career only made them disrespect me more. To them, I was just boring, pathetic, lonely Maeve. A low-level paper pusher making a mediocre salary at some boring desk job. I was only useful when their electricity was about to be turned off. This disrespect was not a sudden explosion. It was a slow, agonizing, daily drip that eroded my boundaries. And I let them treat me like a second-class citizen because of a promise. A promise I made to a dying man in a hospital room that smelled of heavy bleach and finality. I was 22. The rain was lashing against the hospital window. My father was taking his final, ragged breaths. The machines were beeping a frantic, terrifying rhythm. My mother, Coraline, was sitting in the corner, weeping uselessly into a tissue, completely unequipped to handle reality. Out in the hallway, I could hear Sloane and Weston loudly arguing about who was going to pay the daily parking garage fee. My father grabbed my hand. His grip was surprisingly strong, desperate. "Keep them together, Maeve," he rasped, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that haunted my nightmares for years. "Your mother is fragile. Sloane is reckless. Weston is a weak fool. You are the strong one. You have always been the anchor. Promise me. Do not let this family fall apart." I was terrified, but I squeezed his hand and I made the promise. That single whispered sentence became my prison. I took it upon myself to be the glue holding a shattered, rotting vase together. I thought hiding my wealth would keep them from exploiting me, but my silence only bred a monster. And that monster's name was Sloane. Would you have kept a promise like that to a dying parent, even if it destroyed your own peace? When you constantly act as the ultimate safety net for people who absolutely refuse to learn how to walk the tightrope, they stop trying to find their balance. They just jump wildly off the edge, fully expecting you to be waiting at the bottom to catch them. Sloane and Weston loved nothing more than to jump. Their marriage was a relentless theater of financial chaos, but they never downsized. They never skipped a luxury vacation. Because they had me. Let me take you through my personal museum of pain. Let me show you exactly what it means to be the invisible cash machine. About 3 years ago, Weston fancied himself a brilliant entrepreneur. He tried to start a luxury landscaping business, despite knowing nothing about business or landscaping. He ordered top-of-the-line equipment from a major commercial supplier on credit. When the business inevitably failed 6 months later, the supplier filed a massive lien against Sloane and Weston's house. They were going to lose everything. The massive house they used to flex on the neighbors was about to be foreclosed on. Sloane called me, hyperventilating, begging for help. I did not lecture her. I quietly logged into my private banking portal and wired $15,000 directly to the supplier to clear the debt. I saved their home. 2 weeks later, at a family barbecue, I sat quietly on a cheap folding chair while Weston loudly bragged to my Aunt Veda about how he aggressively negotiated his way out of a bad business deal using his incredible street smarts. He did not mention my money. He took all the credit. I just drank my cheap soda and said nothing. Then there was Aunt Veda. Veda is a deeply bitter woman who thrives on manufacturing family drama and tearing others down to feel tall. Last winter, a brutal storm damaged her roof. She cried poverty. She said she was going to freeze. I paid a roofing company $8,000 to fix it. Last month, Veda came to my house for a casual lunch. She walked into my living room, ran her hand over my 5-year-old fabric sofa, and sneered. "It is so dark and depressing in here, Maeve," she announced loudly. "You really need to upgrade your furniture. I suppose with your little desk job salary, you just cannot afford nice things like Sloane can. It is a shame you are not as ambitious as your sister." I looked at the woman sitting under a roof I paid for, praising the sister whose house I saved, while insulting the very person keeping them all out of bankruptcy. The sheer, blinding audacity of it made my jaw ache. Sloane's psychology was simple but toxic. She had always been deeply jealous of my natural independence. Because she felt totally inadequate about her own massive failures, she used material objects to prove she was better than me. She needed me to be the poor, pathetic sister so she could be the glamorous, successful one. And the ultimate symbol of her fake success was her son, my nephew, Cale. Cale was the golden child. He was raised in a universe where the word no simply did not exist. By the time he was 19, he was a walking, talking nightmare of pure, unfiltered entitlement. If you've ever been the designated problem solver in your family, only to be treated like you don't matter, you know exactly how heavy this invisible backpack feels. Drop a yes in the comments if you know this feeling. Because the absolute worst mistake of my entire life was about to happen. And it started with a car. What would you do if your family demanded you buy them a luxury vehicle just to keep up appearances? The true nightmare began roughly 2 years ago. My phone rang on a Tuesday evening. I had just finished negotiating a massive software deployment and was exhausted. It was Sloane. She was sobbing hysterically, executing a perfectly rehearsed performance of maternal desperation. She claimed Kale was being mercilessly bullied at his expensive private college. Why? Because she had to drop him off in her older sport utility vehicle. She said the rich kids were laughing at him. She said he desperately needed his own car to project an image of success for his future corporate internships. Then, she used the ultimate weapon. She brought up my father's dying wish. She cried, saying my dad would want Kale to have a fair shot at life, and that Weston's credit was temporarily frozen due to identity theft. It was a massive, blatant lie. His credit was ruined because of his own stupidity. Maeve, please, she begged. We just need you to co-sign for a sensible, slightly used sedan. I swear to God, we will make the monthly payments. Please do it for Dad. The guilt gnawed at my stomach. I agreed to meet them at the dealership the next afternoon. When I pulled into the lot, I instantly knew I had been played. It was not a standard used car lot. It was a high-end European luxury auto import center. I walked through the massive glass doors. There was no sensible sedan. Sitting in the middle of the pristine, brightly lit showroom floor was a jet black, fully loaded Range Rover. It was an absolute tank of a luxury vehicle. Kale was leaning against the hood, taking selfies for his social media. Standing next to him was his girlfriend, Piper. Piper was a deeply arrogant, status-obsessed girl who chewed her gum with her mouth open and looked at everyone like they were dirt. She was busy adjusting her designer sunglasses, looking utterly bored. Sloane rushed up to me, her eyes wide with fake innocence. Maeve. Thank God. The dealer gave us a steal on this one. It is an investment, really. Kale needs a safe, powerful car. I pulled her aside, my blood boiling. Sloane, are you insane? You cannot afford the premium gas for a Range Rover, let alone the insurance and the massive monthly payments. We can, she hissed, her voice turning sharp. Weston just landed a huge contracting deal. The money is flowing in next month. Just sign the paper, Maeve. Do not ruin this for my son. I looked over at Kale. He did not even acknowledge me. Piper whispered something in his ear, and they both laughed, looking at my cheap, sensible shoes. A wave of profound disgust washed over me. But then my cold, rational, executive brain kicked in. If I simply co-signed a loan for these parasites, they would default in 3 months and my flawless credit score would take a massive hit. But I had the cash. I had a ridiculous amount of liquid cash just sitting in high-yield accounts. I bypassed Sloane entirely. I walked straight into the finance manager's glass office. I did not finance the vehicle. I did not sign a loan. I bought the Range Rover outright, in full, with a wire transfer for $95,000. But I made a very specific, legally binding stipulation. I made absolutely certain that the title, the state registration, and the premium insurance policy were strictly 100% in the name of Maeve. Me. I walked out, tossed the heavy key fob to Kale. He caught it, smirking. Thanks for the wheels, Aunt Maeve, he said, not even looking up from his phone. Piper popped her gum and rolled her eyes. I looked dead at Sloane. You miss one single insurance payment to my account, and this car goes away instantly. Oh, I promise, Maeve. You are an angel. She wept, hugging me tight. They never sent a single dime. For 2 years, I paid the sky-high insurance. I paid the registration. I essentially bought my deeply entitled nephew a luxury tank so he and Piper could play rich kids, while Sloane paraded around her neighborhood telling everyone Weston bought it for them after a brilliant stock market play. I swallowed my pride, but I locked the notarized title in my fireproof safe. I gave her the keys to save her pride. I didn't know I was handing her the exact weapon she would use to try and destroy mine. How far would you let your family push you before you finally snapped? Mistake number 2, the one that finally pushed me to the absolute edge of the cliff, happened about a year after the Range Rover incident. Weston, in a shocking turn of events that surprised absolutely no one, was fired from his latest job. Sloane showed up at my house unannounced on a Sunday morning. She brought Kale with her. She sat at my kitchen table, physically trembling, twisting a napkin into shreds. She looked me dead in the eye and swore they had zero money for groceries. She claimed they were surviving on cheap canned soup and that Kale was losing weight from the extreme stress of poverty. It was a completely calculated, theatrical fabrication. But she knew exactly which emotional buttons to push to activate the fixer in me. I could not stand the thought of my nephew going hungry, even if his parents were total failures. But I knew if I handed Sloane cash, Weston would spend it on golf clubs and cheap beer. So, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a heavy metal, secondary platinum credit card linked directly to my personal reserve checking account. It had a massive, almost limitless ceiling. I slid the cold metal card across the granite counter. "Look at me, Sloane," I said, my voice dead serious. "This is for life or death emergencies only. I mean groceries to keep you alive. Gas to get Weston to job interviews. Pharmacy runs. If the winter furnace breaks, you use this. Do not use this for a single other thing. I will monitor every statement." "Oh, Maeve, I swear on Dad's grave." She wept, clutching the heavy card to her chest like a holy artifact. "You are my savior." For the first few months, she behaved. $100 at the supermarket here, $50 at the gas station there. Because I was heavily involved in a corporate merger, traveling across the country, I relaxed my vigilance. I trusted my automated accounting software to flag anything catastrophic. I did not realize she had slowly, methodically started pushing the boundaries to see what she could get away with. I found out the horrific, stomach-churning truth exactly 3 days before my 32nd birthday. My personal wealth manager, a sharp guy named Gabriel, called my private line. "Ms. Maeve," he said, clearing his throat nervously. "Everything is highly secure, but I wanted to personally flag the extreme volume of luxury retail and international travel transactions on this secondary platinum card. It does not match your usual spending profile at all." I pulled up the itemized statement on my dual monitors. My blood ran completely ice cold. A physical wave of nausea hit my stomach. In the span of just 6 weeks, Sloane had racked up $18,000 in completely frivolous, arrogant charges. 18,000. There were charges for high-end day spas, 2 designer handbags, expensive steakhouse dinners, and the absolute worst charge of all, 2 first-class plane tickets to Paris for Kale and Piper for their upcoming spring break. I sat in my quiet glass office staring at the glowing screen for a full hour. I did not feel angry at first. I felt profoundly, deeply stupid. I had turned my own sister into a blood-sucking parasite. I reached for my phone to scream at her, but my hand stopped. Yelling would do nothing. She would cry, play the victim, blame Weston, and my mother would call me begging me to be the bigger person. No. A simple argument was not going to fix a decade of systemic financial abuse. I needed to amputate the rotting limb completely. And right then, looking at the city skyline from 50 floors up, I laid out the trap. The upcoming birthday dinner at my house was their final exam. All they had to do was treat me like a human being for 2 hours. Just 2 hours. If they failed, I was going to become the architect of their ultimate reality check. Would your family pass a test like this, or would they fail spectacularly? I hosted the birthday dinner at my own house. I spent the entire Saturday cleaning the floors, preparing an expensive, dry-aged prime rib, and setting the dining table with good silver. For the first time in years, I decided to actually treat myself. I went to a high-end boutique downtown and bought a breathtaking, custom-tailored silk dress in a deep, elegant sapphire blue. It was not flashy, but the cut was exquisite, and the fabric flowed perfectly. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see the tired family doormat. I saw a successful, powerful woman. The guests arrived right at 6. My mother Coraline, Sloane, Weston, Kale, and Aunt Veda. The exact second they walked through my front door, the energy in my home became incredibly toxic, heavy, and exhausting. Nobody brought a gift. Not a bottle of wine, not even a cheap $2 greeting card. Aunt Veda immediately started running her finger along my entryway table, checking for dust. "Still no husband, Maeve?" she asked loudly, taking off her coat. "Such a shame. You are getting so old." We sat down for dinner. The prime rib I spent hours cooking was barely acknowledged. Sloane took one sip of the expensive red wine I poured and literally gagged. "Ugh, Maeve," she complained, pushing the crystal glass away. "This tastes like cheap vinegar." You really should not buy your wine at the discount grocery store. It is embarrassing. I forced a tight smile and said nothing. Weston spent the entire meal aggressively chewing his meat with his mouth open, talking loudly about a huge boat he was planning to buy. A boat I knew for an absolute mathematical fact he could not afford without begging me for another massive loan. But Cale was the absolute worst part of the evening. He sat slumped in my nice dining chair, wearing a ridiculous designer graphic hoodie that I knew had been purchased with my emergency platinum credit card. He had his phone propped up against his water glass, actively on FaceTime with his girlfriend Piper right in the middle of my birthday dinner. "Yeah, babe," Cale said loudly, totally ignoring everyone at the table. "I am taking the Range Rover into the shop next week to get the windows totally blacked out. The guys at the club said it will look sick. Dad said if I pass my finals, he is going to buy me the upgraded exhaust system." Piper's shrill, annoying voice echoed from the phone speaker. "Good. Your aunt's house looks so incredibly boring. How much longer do you have to stay there?" "Just an hour," Cale laughed. "It is painfully dull here." I slowly lowered my fork. I looked directly across the table at Weston. Weston suddenly found his cloth napkin fascinating. He refused to meet my eye. He was actually sitting there, eating the expensive food I bought, in the house I paid for, letting his teenage son believe that he was the powerful provider funding that $95,000 luxury car. Coraline, my own mother, looked at me and sighed. "Maeve, darling, please do not make that sour face. You really should ask Sloane where she shops. If you dressed a little more like her and maybe put on some nice makeup, you wouldn't be sitting alone in this quiet little house. You have to put effort in if you want a man to take care of you." The overwhelming disrespect vibrating through the room was suffocating. I was feeding them, housing them, financing their fake wealthy lifestyle, and they were sitting at my table treating me like absolute garbage. The tension was building like a pressure cooker. How much disrespect can one person take before the dam finally breaks? The heavy, suffocating air in the dining room finally reached its breaking point when it was time for dessert. I had ordered an incredibly expensive, custom-made blueberry buttercream cake from a high-end bakery downtown. I walked out of the kitchen carrying the large, heavy cake on a glass platter. As I approached the table, Cale was still loudly laughing on FaceTime with Piper. "Cale," I said. My voice was not a shout. It was low, even, and dangerously calm. "Please put the phone away while we have cake. It is incredibly disrespectful." Cale rolled his eyes dramatically, letting out a loud sigh. "God, Aunt Maeve, chill out. You are so uptight. No wonder you are single." Sloane immediately bristled. Her face turned red. "Do not speak to my son that way in front of me, Maeve," she snapped, standing up from her chair. "He is an adult. He can talk to his girlfriend if he wants to. You do not know the first thing about raising a successful kid." I stood near the edge of the table, holding the heavy glass platter. Sloane stepped right into my personal space, her eyes full of venom. She looked at my custom sapphire silk dress, her gaze dripping with pure jealousy. "You think you are so special today, do not you?" Sloane sneered, leaning in close. And then, she did it. It was not an accident. She did not trip. She deliberately, forcefully brought her hand up and shoved me hard in the shoulder. I lost my balance. The heavy glass platter tipped backward. I crashed hard into the edge of the mahogany table, and the entire massive blueberry cake flipped up and smashed directly into my chest. The heavy, freezing cold blue frosting smeared violently down the front of my expensive silk dress. The glass platter hit the floor and shattered into a dozen pieces. The dining room went completely, paralyzingly silent. The only sound was Piper laughing through the phone speaker. I stayed frozen against the table. I looked down at the ruined silk, the sticky blue mess clinging to my skin. I looked up at Sloane. She was standing there, looking incredibly pleased with herself. She did not reach out to help me. She did not apologize. She smirked, looking me dead in the eye, and delivered the killing blow. "Now you look like the trash you really are." I waited for the explosion. I waited for Weston to grab his wife and demand she apologize. I waited for my mother to scream at Sloane for ruining my birthday. Nothing. Weston awkwardly cleared his throat and looked at the wall. And then my mother, Coraline, let out a nervous little laugh. "Oh, Maeve, stop being so dramatic," Coraline said, waving her hand dismissively. "She just slipped. It was an accident. Do not ruin a perfectly good evening over a dress. I will buy you a new one from the discount rack at the mall tomorrow." My own mother just watched my sister physically assault me, ruin my expensive property, and maliciously humiliate me, and she defended her. Right then, in that exact freezing second, something inside my chest snapped. The heavy, invisible chains I had worn for 10 years shattered into a million pieces. The promise I made to my dying father dissolved into the cold, sticky blueberry frosting clinging to my dress. I realized with terrifying, crystal clarity that trying to keep this family together was actively destroying my soul. It was not helping them. It was weaponizing their worst traits. I did not scream. I did not throw a glass against the wall. I did not even demand an apology, because an apology from these parasites meant nothing. I just smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the cold, detached smile of an apex predator right before the steel trap snaps shut. "Excuse me for a moment," I said quietly, my voice echoing in the tense room. "I need to change." I walked slowly upstairs to my master bedroom. I stripped off the ruined, expensive silk dress and threw it directly into the trash can. I did not even try to wipe the stain. I put on a pair of faded blue jeans and a plain black t-shirt. I went into the bathroom and splashed freezing water on my face. Looking in the mirror, I expected to feel rage. But instead, I felt a bizarre, overwhelming sense of absolute peace. The chronic anxiety, the bitter resentment, the heavy burden of being the family ATM. It was all completely gone, replaced by a cold, surgical precision. I walked back downstairs. They were eating the ruined cake off the table, laughing. I sat back down, poured myself a fresh glass of water, and looked at Weston. "So, Weston," I said pleasantly, "tell me more about this big boat you are buying." Sloane blinked, confused by my total lack of anger. Coraline beamed, thrilled that her compliant, pathetic daughter was keeping the peace and taking the abuse like a champion. They finished eating, they drank my wine, and they left around 9 o'clock, completely, blissfully oblivious to the fact that they had just sealed their own spectacular downfall. I locked the heavy front door. I did not clean the dining room. I walked straight into my dark home office and booted up my high-powered laptop. The free ride was officially over. It was time for surgery. If you are enjoying watching this toxic empire begin to crumble, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below with the name of the city you are living in right now. Every single comment helps this video reach more people, and I appreciate you so much. Now, let's get back to the revenge, because what happens the next morning is pure poetry. I walked straight down the hallway into my home office and booted up my high-powered laptop. The room was pitch black, illuminated only by the harsh blue glow of my dual monitors. The time for being the bigger person had passed. The time for silent suffering was officially over. It was time for surgery. Step 1. I logged securely into my private banking portal. I navigated through the menus to the secondary emergency platinum credit card account. The one Sloane carried in her designer purse like a VIP pass to a life she did not earn. I looked at the current balance. It was sitting at just over $5,000 for the current billing cycle alone. I did not just freeze the card. A temporary freeze can be undone with a phone call. I did not pause it. I clicked the administrative override settings, bypassed the warning prompts, and permanently canceled the card. I flagged the account as officially closed by the primary account holder. The limitless financial lifeline that Sloane had ruthlessly abused for over a year was severed instantly. It simply evaporated into the digital ether. Step 2. I opened the bottom drawer of my heavy mahogany desk and pulled out a reinforced steel lockbox. I keyed in the security code. Inside, resting on black velvet, was the original spare smart key fob for the black Range Rover. I picked up my smartphone and opened the proprietary vehicle management app provided by the dealership. Because I was the sole legal registered owner of the vehicle, I had full, unrestricted telemetry and security access. I checked the live GPS tracking. The massive luxury tank was parked exactly where I knew it would be, sitting proudly right in the middle of Sloane's suburban driveway, exactly 12 miles away. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not used in a few years. It rang twice before a deep, gruff voice answered the line. "Luke, it is Maeve." Luke was a guy I grew up with in our old working-class neighborhood. He now owned and operated a high-end, highly secure exotic car towing and storage facility on the industrial side of the city. He dealt with discreet repossessions for the ultra-wealthy. He did not ask stupid questions. He just did his job, and he did it with absolute, airtight discretion. "Hey Maeve, it is a late night. What do you need?" Luke asked. I could hear the sound of a garage door opening in the background. "I need a stealth flatbed pickup," I said, my voice completely steady. "Tonight. Right now, actually. It is a brand new Range Rover autobiography. I have the spare keys. I have the title in my hand. It is my vehicle. I need it pulled smoothly from a residential driveway and stored in your most secure, climate-controlled indoor bay. Nobody sees it. Nobody touches it. Nobody breathes on it until I say so. Send the address," Luke said simply. "I will be there in 40 minutes. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I drove my unassuming sedan out to Sloane's neighborhood. The suburban streets were dead quiet, bathed in the sickly orange glow of the streetlights. I parked a full block away, killed my engine, and walked silently to her driveway. There it was. The pride and joy of Cale's pathetic, entitled existence. The symbol of Sloane's fake superiority. I used the spare smart fob to quietly unlock the doors. The lights flashed once. I slipped into the driver's seat. The interior smelled overwhelmingly of cheap designer cologne, stale French fries, and unearned arrogance. I did not start the massive engine. The roar of the exhaust would have woken the entire house. Instead, I waited in the dark, gripping the leather steering wheel until Luke's massive matte black stealth flatbed rolled silently down the street, its headlights completely off. Within 5 minutes, moving with practiced military precision, Luke and I had the Range Rover hooked up, put into neutral, and winched smoothly onto the bed of the truck. It was completely silent. Flawless. As the tow truck pulled away into the night, disappearing around the corner, I stood alone on the cold sidewalk, looking at the large, empty space in the concrete driveway. A cold, profound, deeply satisfying peace settled deep into my chest. The suffocating anxiety that had ruled my life for a decade was gone. Tomorrow morning, their grand illusions were going to shatter into dust. And there was absolutely nothing they could do to stop it. I was sitting at my kitchen table the next morning, drinking a cup of strong black coffee, watching the sun come up. The clock on the microwave read exactly 8:40 in the morning. Suddenly, my cell phone started vibrating relentlessly against the wood table. The caller ID flashed Sloane's name. I took a slow sip of coffee and let it ring. It stopped, went to voicemail, then immediately started ringing again. This time it was my mother Coraline calling, then Weston. The panic was officially setting in. I finally answered on the 5th try, clearing my throat to make my voice sound groggy and confused, as if I had just woken up. "Hello? Maeve. Maeve, you have to get over here right now." Sloane was screaming so incredibly loudly the audio distorted in my phone speaker. "Cale's car's gone. Someone stole it. It was right in the driveway last night, and now it is completely gone. Stolen." I injected the absolute perfect amount of fake, sleepy concern into my voice. "Sloane, slow down. Are you sure he did not go out last night and park it somewhere else?" "Of course I am sure. He was asleep in his bed. He is having a full-blown panic attack on the lawn right now. Maeve, we called the police. They are on their way. You need to come here. Weston is losing his mind and does not know what to do." "All right, calm down. I will be there as soon as I can," I said, and calmly hung up the phone. I took my absolute time getting dressed. I finished my entire cup of coffee. I washed the mug. I drove the exact speed limit all the way across town to their house. When I finally pulled up to the curb, the scene playing out on their front lawn was absolute, glorious chaos. Cale was pacing back and forth across the grass, violently pulling at his hair, looking like his entire universe had just collapsed in on itself. He was not wearing his smug, arrogant smirk anymore. He looked like a terrified, helpless child. Sloane was hovering over him, crying hysterically and wringing her hands. Weston was standing near the edge of the driveway, helplessly looking up and down the empty street, as if hoping the massive $95,000 tank would magically materialize out of thin air. Parked at an angle in front of the house, its light bar flashing silently, was a black and white police cruiser. Officer Ryan, a seasoned, gray-haired cop with a visibly tired expression, was standing by the trunk, holding a metal clipboard, trying to extract a coherent statement from a hyperventilating Sloane. I parked my car, turned off the engine, and walked slowly up the driveway, my hands casually tucked into my jacket pockets. "Maeve," Sloane shrieked, running toward me and grabbing my arm with a vice grip. "Thank God you're here. The police are asking all these questions. They need to put out an alert or a helicopter or whatever it is called. Cale is supposed to pick up Piper for brunch at the club in an hour. He will be ruined." I gently but firmly peeled her desperate fingers off my jacket sleeve and walked over to the police officer. "Good morning, officer. I am Maeve, the aunt of the boy over there. What seems to be the situation this morning?" Officer Ryan sighed heavily, clearly annoyed by the suburban drama. "Well, ma'am, they're officially reporting a stolen vehicle. A late model, black Range Rover. I was just asking the young man for the license plate number and the vehicle registration details so I can run it through the national database." "It is my car," Cale yelled from across the lawn, his voice cracking loudly. "Some lowlife ghetto scumbag stole my beautiful car. You need to go out there, find them, and arrest them right now." Officer Ryan gave Cale a long, slow look of profound, professional distaste. He keyed the radio microphone on his shoulder. "Dispatch, Unit 4. I need a plate run. Stand by for the alphanumeric." He looked back at Sloane, pen poised over his clipboard. "Ma'am, do you have the plate number?" Sloane, trembling, rattled off the incredibly obnoxious vanity plate Cale had begged for. We stood in complete silence on the dewy grass for about 60 agonizing seconds. Then, the radio on the officer's shoulder crackled to life with a burst of static. "Unit 4, dispatch. We have a hit on that plate. Registered to a Black Range Rover autobiography. History is clean. No outstanding warrants, no liens." "Copy that, dispatch," Officer Ryan said. "Who is the registered legal owner on file?" "Registered owner is listed as Maeve." The dispatcher's voice echoed loudly across the lawn, clearly reading out my exact full name and my home address. The silence that fell over the front yard was thicker, heavier, and far more devastating than the silence at the dinner table the night before. Sloane froze, her mouth hanging completely open. Cale stopped his frantic pacing mid-step. Weston slowly turned his head to look at me, his eyes wide with sudden, terrifying realization. Officer Ryan lowered his metal clipboard. He looked down at his notes, processed the information, and then looked directly at me. "Ma'am, your name is Maeve?" "Yes, officer, it is," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly calm. Officer Ryan turned his attention back to Sloane. His professional demeanor instantly shifted from patient public servant to highly irritated law enforcement officer. "Ma'am, you called 911 and reported a stolen vehicle. But according to the state database and the Department of Motor Vehicles, this vehicle belongs legally and entirely to this woman standing right here. Not your son. Not your husband. Did she give you explicit written permission to report her personal property as stolen?" "No," Sloane stammered, all the color rapidly draining from her face, leaving her looking sickly pale. "No, officer. You do not understand the situation. She just co-signed the paperwork to help us out. It is Cale's car. It is my son's car. That is absolutely not how the law works in this state, ma'am," Officer Ryan said bluntly, his voice hard. "The name on the physical title is the sole legal owner of the property. If Ms. Maeve did not report it stolen, it is not a stolen vehicle. This is a domestic civil matter. It has nothing to do with the police." He looked back at me. "Ma'am, do you happen to know where your vehicle is currently located?" I turned my head and looked directly into Cale's eyes. They were wide with a chaotic mix of profound confusion and dawning, absolute horror. I do, officer, I said clearly. The vehicle is perfectly safe. It is secured in a private, locked garage facility. I personally had it moved late last night. Cale completely snapped. You took it. You took my car. Give me the keys right now, you jealous piece of trash. Cale lunged forward, his fists clenched, but Weston finally found his paternal reflexes. He grabbed his son hard by the shoulders, physically dragging him backward. Officer Ryan immediately stepped between us, his hand dropping casually but purposefully to rest near his heavy-duty belt. All right, that is enough, kid. Calm down right now before I put you in cuffs. It is not your car. You have absolutely no legal right to it. And if you touch her, you are going to jail for assault. The officer closed his metal clipboard with a loud snap and looked at Sloane with utter disgust. Ma'am, filing a false police report is a serious crime. Since there seems to be a massive family misunderstanding here, I am going to let this slide with a warning. But if you ever waste my department's valuable time again over a luxury car you do not own, I will write you a citation and I will arrest whoever gets out of line. Have a good day. Officer Ryan turned, got into his cruiser, and drove away, leaving a devastating, suffocating silence in his wake. Sloane stared at me, her mouth opening and closing rapidly like a fish suffocating on dry land. Maeve, what did you do? Why did you take Cale's car in the middle of the night? I did not take Cale's car, Sloane, I said, my voice eerily, terrifyingly calm. I took my car. And since you made it very clear last night that I am just trash, I figured you certainly would not want your precious son to be seen driving a vehicle funded by my pathetic, mediocre salary. It was a joke. Sloane screamed, tears of genuine, terrifying panic streaming down her face. We were just messing around last night. You cannot do this, Maeve. Piper is expecting him to drive her to the country club today. He will be a laughingstock. Then he better start walking, I said, turning on my heel toward my sedan. Maeve, wait, Weston finally spoke up, his voice pathetic, weak, and pleading. Come on. Let's go inside. Let's talk about this. Do not do this to the boy. We will make him apologize to you for the cake. There is absolutely nothing to talk about, Weston, I said, opening my car door. You wanted to play pretend. You wanted to act rich on my dime. The game is over. I drove away, leaving them standing helplessly on the lawn. But I knew the pain had only just begun. Taking the car was just the physical, visible blow. The invisible, devastating financial strike was about to hit them where it truly hurt. Taking the car was just the appetizer. The real main course hit Sloane exactly 3 hours later at the checkout line of the most expensive grocery store in town. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I was sitting in my glass office reviewing some complex software contracts when my phone buzzed. It was a frantic text message from Aunt Veda. Veda loved gossip more than she loved oxygen, and she could not wait to share the disaster. The text read, Maeve, what is going on? Sloane just called me sobbing from the organic market. She tried to buy $500 worth of prime steaks and wine, and the platinum card declined at the register. The cashier cut the card in half. She is screaming that the bank made a mistake. Are you broke? I stared at the glowing screen. I could picture the scene perfectly. The long line of wealthy suburbanites standing impatiently behind her, whispering. The cashier looking at her with thinly veiled pity and annoyance. Sloane frantically pulling out her phone, sweating, desperately trying to log into an online banking portal she no longer had access to. It was the ultimate public humiliation for a woman whose entire existence revolved around fake appearances. Exactly 5 minutes after Veda's text, my office phone rang. It was the head receptionist down in the main lobby. Her voice was unusually tight. Ms. Maeve, I apologize for the interruption. There is a situation at the front security desk. 3 individuals are here demanding to see you. A woman claiming to be your sister, an older woman who says she is your mother, and a young man. They are being quite loud. Building security is on standby. Should I have them escorted out? I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. They had actually done it. After the humiliation at the grocery store, they had driven downtown to ambush me at my job, hoping to embarrass me in front of my managers and force me to hand over the car keys to save face. No, do not call security just yet, I said smoothly. Send them up to Conference Room B. I will handle it. Conference Room B is our flagship executive meeting space. It features a massive, polished mahogany table, plush leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the entire city skyline. It is designed specifically to intimidate and impress millionaire clients. It was the perfect stage. I gathered a very specific manila folder from my desk drawer and walked down the quiet, thickly carpeted hallway. As I approached the heavy glass doors of the conference room, I could hear Sloane's shrill voice echoing off the walls. I cannot believe she works in a place like this, Sloane was saying loudly to Coraline. She probably just sorts the mail in the basement. We need to find her manager. If we threaten to expose her for stealing Cale's car, they will fire her. She will have to give it back to keep her pathetic job. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped inside. Sloane, Coraline, and Cale spun around. They looked completely out of place. Sloane was wearing a wrinkled blouse, looking exhausted and frantic. My mother looked nervous, clutching her cheap purse with white knuckles. Cale was wearing the same designer hoodie he wore at my birthday dinner, but his arrogant smirk was replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated rage. Maeve, Sloane shrieked, marching toward me. You are completely out of your mind. You have ruined Cale's life. We have been calling you all morning. You are going to walk out to that parking garage right now and give my son his keys back. Or I am calling your boss and telling them you are a thief. And you better call the bank and fix that credit card right now. I was humiliated at the store. You already tried calling the police, Sloane, I said, walking slowly to the head of the mahogany table. I did not sit down. I stood tall, looking at them. Officer Ryan explained the law to you very clearly. You cannot steal your own property. It is not your property. Cale yelled, slamming his hands down on the expensive table. You bought it for me. You promised it to me. You are just a jealous loser who cannot stand seeing someone else succeed. Before I could respond, the door to the conference room opened again. It was Merrick. Merrick is the founding partner of our firm. He is a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed in a custom suit, with a commanding presence that demands instant respect in any room he enters. He is also my mentor. He had seen the commotion at the front desk and, knowing my usually quiet demeanor, came to check on me. Maeve, Merrick said, his deep voice instantly silencing Sloane and Cale. He looked at my family with polite but cold curiosity. Is everything all right in here? Security mentioned there was a disturbance. Do we need legal involved? Sloane puffed out her chest, seeing an older man in a tailored suit and assuming he was my supervisor. Yes, actually. Are you her boss? You need to know what kind of person you have working for you. This woman is a thief. She stole my son's car and canceled the credit card she gave us to help feed my family. She is starving her own mother and nephew. You should fire her immediately. Merrick looked at Sloane for a long, silent moment. Then he looked at me, a slight, knowing smile touching the corners of his mouth. Fire her? Merrick chuckled, a rich, dry sound. Ma'am, I could not fire Maeve even if I wanted to. She is our senior executive director. She is a senior partner in this firm. She manages corporate contracts worth more than the entire gross domestic product of small island nations. In fact, she practically owns this floor. Merrick turned to me. Handle your business, Maeve. Let me know if you need building security to escort them out. He nodded respectfully to me and walked out, closing the heavy glass door behind him. The silence that hit the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears. Sloane stared at the closed door, her face completely drained of color. Cale's jaw physically dropped open. My mother Coraline took a shaky step backward, her eyes darting around the luxurious, multi-million-dollar boardroom, finally registering the reality of where she was standing. The illusion was dead. The pathetic, mediocre paper pusher they thought they could bully simply did not exist. I was the one holding all the cards, and I always had been. I tossed the thick manila folder onto the center of the mahogany table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. Go ahead, Sloane, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a razor. Open it. She approached the table like it was rigged to explode. With trembling fingers, she opened the cover. Inside were the indisputable facts of their parasitic existence. On the left, I said, pointing to the documents, is the original notarized title and registration for the Range Rover. As you can clearly see, my name is the only name on that document. Not Cale's. Not Weston's. Mine. I bought it in cash. I paid the insurance. I looked directly at Cale. He was shrinking back against the glass wall, looking smaller and more pathetic than I had ever seen him. That hoodie you are wearing right now, the one you wore while your mother pushed me into a cake. I took a step toward him. I pulled the statements. That hoodie was purchased on my platinum credit card. The shoes on your feet were bought with my money. You have never worked a hard day in your life. You are a 19-year-old child playing dress-up with my salary. Cale opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The bravado was completely gone, crushed under the weight of undeniable reality. I turned my attention back to my sister. On the right side of that folder, Sloan, are the itemized statements from the emergency credit card. The card I gave you so you would not go hungry. There are $18,000 in charges for day spas, designer handbags, and first-class plane tickets to Paris. You lied to my face. You used our dying father's memory to manipulate me into funding a lifestyle you have not earned and cannot afford. Maeve, please. My mother Coraline suddenly cried out, stepping forward and reaching for my arm. Tears were streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. Please stop this. This is your family. Your flesh and blood. You are tearing us apart over money. Your father would be so disappointed in you for treating your sister this way. I looked at my mother, the woman who had watched me be physically pushed and humiliated and called it an accident. The woman who had enabled Sloane's toxic behavior for decades. No, Mom, I said, pulling my arm away gently but firmly. I am not tearing this family apart. I am the only reason this family has not been living on the street for the past 10 years. I kept the promise I made to Dad. I kept you all afloat. But I am done being the anchor that you dragged through the mud. You wanted to know what I look like when I am trash? You are looking at it. The free ride is permanently over. I walked over to the desk console and pressed the intercom button. Security, please come up to conference room B to escort my guests to the lobby. We are finished here. Sloane collapsed into one of the leather chairs, sobbing into her hands. Cale stood frozen, staring blankly out the window at the city below, realizing that his entire identity as the wealthy, cool kid on campus had just been incinerated. As the security guards walked into the room, polite but firm, guiding my broken family toward the elevators, I stood alone in the boardroom. I did not feel a shred of guilt. I felt a massive, suffocating weight lift off my chest. I could finally breathe. I blocked them all. My phone was finally silent. But 6 months later, I decided to take a detour past a local fast food restaurant. I needed to see if my harsh lesson had actually worked. The immediate aftermath of the boardroom confrontation was a deafening, terrifying silence from their end. For the first time in 10 years, my phone did not ring with demands, emergencies, or manufactured crises. The realization that I was utterly serious, combined with the shock of seeing my actual corporate power, had finally broken their delusion. But I knew I could not just leave things hanging. The Range Rover was still sitting in Luke's secure garage. And as much as it represented my ultimate leverage, it was also a depreciating asset and a constant reminder of my own foolishness. A week after the ambush at my office, I called a luxury auto broker. I did not drive the car back to Sloane's house. I did not hand the keys over to Cale with a stern warning. I did not want the car, and I certainly was not going to let them have it. I sold the Range Rover. Because it was in pristine condition, I recovered almost the entire purchase price. But I did not just put that $90,000 back into my own savings account. Despite everything, despite the incredible disrespect, the physical push into the cake, and the years of being used, I am not a vindictive monster. I still cared about Cale's actual future, even if I despised his current personality. I knew that without my constant financial bailouts, Sloane and Weston would never be able to afford to send him to a decent university. So I took the entire sum from the sale of the car and contacted my legal team. I had my lawyers draft the paperwork to create an irrevocable, ironclad educational trust. I dumped the money into a legitimate college fund, but I put extreme, unbreakable stipulations on it. The money could only be used for tuition, university housing, and required textbooks. It could never be paid out in cash. Neither Sloan nor Weston nor Cale could access a single dime directly. The trust would pay the educational institutions directly. If Cale decided to drop out and try to start a foolish business or buy another flashy car, the money would remain locked away until he was 35 years old. I was giving him the gift of an education, the tools to build his own real wealth. But I was completely removing his ability to use my money for status. I sent the legally binding trust documents to Sloan's house via certified mail. I did not include a note. The legal paperwork spoke for itself. 2 days after the certified mail was delivered, I received a surprise visitor at my house. It was late on a Friday evening. It was pouring rain outside, a cold, miserable downpour. The doorbell rang, and when I looked through the peephole, I saw Weston standing on my porch. He looked terrible. He was soaked to the bone. His shoulders were slumped, and the usual false bravado he carried himself with was completely gone. I opened the door but did not invite him inside. We stood on the threshold, the cold rain blowing onto the porch. "Maeve," Weston said, his voice barely above a whisper. He could not meet my eyes. He stared at the welcome mat. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" "Make it quick, Weston," I said, leaning against the door frame, my arms crossed over my chest. He rubbed his face with wet, shaking hands. I wanted to say I am sorry for everything. For the dinner. For the cake. For letting Sloan treat you the way she did. I saw the trust documents for Cale's college fund. You did not have to do that after how he treated you. You are a better person than I am, Maeve. A much better person. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me in his entire life. But an apology does not pay the bills, and it does not erase a decade of profound weakness. "Why are you really here, Weston?" I asked, cutting through his speech. "Sloan sent you to ask for a loan, did not she?" Weston swallowed hard, looking deeply, profoundly ashamed. "Things are really bad, Maeve. Sloan is talking about a divorce because the stress of having no money is tearing us apart. The mortgage is past due. They are threatening foreclosure on the house. It is a total nightmare. We just need $10,000 to catch up. I swear on my life, I will pay you back. I will get a second job. I will work nights. Just $10,000 to save the house." I looked at this broken man. A man who had allowed his wife and son to walk all over him and everyone else because he was too afraid to set boundaries. He wanted me to save him one more time. "No, Weston," I said firmly. The word hung in the cold, wet air. He looked up at me, pure desperation in his eyes. "Maeve, please. We are going to lose the house." "Then you lose the house," I told him, my voice completely devoid of pity. "You sell it. You downsize. You move into an apartment you can actually afford. You get that second job. And you start acting like an adult instead of a bystander in your own life. I am not writing you a check. If Sloan wants a divorce because you cannot fund her fantasy life anymore, then let her get a lawyer. That is your mess to clean up, not mine." Weston stood there for a long moment in the freezing rain. He did not argue. He did not yell. He just slowly nodded, finally accepting the brutal, unavoidable reality of the situation. He turned and walked back out into the downpour, getting into his older car and driving away. It was harsh. It was a brutal, unforgiving form of tough love. But it was the only way to stop the bleeding. I went back inside, locked the door, and picked up my phone. I blocked Sloan's number. I blocked Weston. I blocked Cale. I blocked Coraline and Aunt Veda. I created an absolute fortress of silence around myself. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt truly, wonderfully safe. 6 months passed. Half a year of absolute, glorious tranquility. The immediate result of setting those massive concrete boundaries was a profound shift in my own mental and physical health. Without the constant, low-level anxiety of wondering what disaster Sloan was going to drag me into next. I thrived. I slept 8 hours a night. I focused intensely on my career. 3 months after the incident in the boardroom, Merrick called me into his office and offered me a promotion to managing partner. It came with an equity stake in the firm and a salary increase that secured my financial future for the rest of my life. I had finally stopped pouring my energy into a leaking bucket and started investing it in myself. But I was not completely blind to what was happening on the other side of town. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard the updates. The collapse of their fake empire had been brutal, but absolutely necessary. Weston actually followed through. He did not buy the boat. Instead, he swallowed his massive pride, took a second job working night shifts at a logistics warehouse, and started slowly digging them out of the massive hole they had created. They were forced to sell the huge house and move into a much smaller, sensible townhouse. Sloan was forced to get a job working as a receptionist at a local dental clinic. It was a massive blow to her fragile ego, having to serve coffee and answer phones for people she used to look down on at the country club. But it was the reality check she desperately needed. The most profound change, however, was in Cale. Without the $95,000 Range Rover, without my platinum credit card to buy designer clothes, and without the illusion of immense wealth to hide behind, his fake life shattered. Piper, his status-obsessed girlfriend, dumped him through a text message less than a week after he lost the car. His fair-weather friends at college slowly drifted away when he could no longer pick up the check at expensive restaurants. To my genuine surprise, Cale did not completely fold. Faced with the reality that his college fund was strictly controlled by an ironclad trust and that he had absolutely zero spending money, he was forced to enter the real world. He got a job. He did not get a glamorous corporate internship. He got a job working the drive-thru window at a local fast food burger franchise. One evening, driving home from a late meeting, I intentionally took a detour past that specific restaurant. I pulled into the parking lot and parked in the shadows near the back. I watched through the glowing glass windows of the kitchen. There was Cale, the golden boy. He was wearing a cheap polyester uniform shirt, an ugly visor, and a headset. He was sweating, wiping down a greasy stainless steel counter, while a manager yelled at him to hurry up with a massive order of fries. He looked exhausted. He looked humbled. He looked, for the very first time in his entire life, like a young man learning the actual value of $1. It was hard to watch, seeing my own nephew sweating over a deep fryer, but I knew it was the most valuable education he would ever receive. Far more valuable than the college tuition I was paying for. The real test of our new dynamic came in late November, right before the Thanksgiving holiday. I received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was not a text or a demanding phone call. It was a carefully written letter from Sloan. She did not ask for money. She did not mention the past. She simply invited me to their new townhouse for Thanksgiving dinner. She wrote, "We know we have a lot to prove, but the table is not the same without you. We would be honored if you came." I thought about it for a long time. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I had won the war. The boundaries were set in stone. I decided to go, if only to see the results of the storm I had created. When I pulled up to their townhouse on Thanksgiving Day, there were no luxury cars in the driveway. It looked like a normal, middle-class American home. I knocked on the door. Sloan answered. She looked older, tired, and her hair was not perfectly blown out at a salon. But there was a strange, quiet dignity about her that I had not seen since we were children. "Maeve," she said softly, stepping aside to let me in. "Thank you for coming." The house smelled like roasted turkey and actual home cooking. Weston was sitting in an armchair wearing a faded flannel shirt. He stood up immediately, walked over, and shook my hand firmly. It was the handshake of a man who was working hard for his keep. "Good to see you, Maeve," he said, his voice steady. Then Cale walked out of the kitchen. He was holding a stack of plates. He stopped when he saw me. He did not have a smirk. He walked over to me, set the plates down on the dining table, and stood up straight. "Aunt Maeve," Cale said, his voice dropping the arrogant teenager drawl. He reached into the pocket of his jeans and pulled out a small, awkwardly wrapped box. He handed it to me. I bought this for you. With my own paycheck from the restaurant. I looked at the cheap wrapping paper. I carefully tore it open. Inside was a simple, heavy ceramic coffee mug. It had a cheesy joke about spreadsheets printed on the side. It probably cost $15. But holding it in my hands, it felt heavier and more valuable than any luxury item they had ever demanded from me. I am sorry, Cale said, looking me directly in the eye. I could see the shame burning in his cheeks. I am really sorry for what I did on your birthday. I was an arrogant jerk. I did not understand how hard you worked for what you have. Working the fryer, it sucks. It is really hard. I get it now. I looked at the kid. He smelled faintly of old fry grease and humility. Thank you, Cale, I said, my voice softening just a fraction. I appreciate the gift. And I accept your apology. The dinner was not a joyous, loud, perfect family gathering. It was quiet. It was careful. It was awkward. Everyone was walking on eggshells, intensely aware of the new power dynamic in the room. There were no arrogant boasts about imaginary wealth. There were no passive-aggressive insults disguised as jokes. There was just a family, broken and slowly trying to piece themselves back together with glue they had to buy themselves. It is a terrifying thing to realize that the people you love are actively destroying you. It goes against every instinct to turn your back on your own family when they are struggling. But I learned the hardest, most vital lesson of my entire life. There is a massive, fundamental difference between helping someone and enabling them. Helping someone is giving them a ladder to climb out of a hole. Enabling them is climbing down into the hole with them, handing them a shovel and paying them to keep digging. Sometimes love is not soft. Sometimes love is not paying the rent or co-signing the loan. Sometimes the most loving thing you can possibly do for a person is to let them hit rock bottom. You have to let them feel the cold, hard concrete of reality. Because until they feel the pain of their own failures, they will never, ever respect the value of your success. I forgave them, but I will never fund their lives again. Some people in the family still say I went too far by completely breaking them financially. What do you think? Was I too harsh, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you who are truly part of the 1% Club, the amazing people who stayed with me through every twist and turn until the very last second, do me a huge favor and comment the letter W below. W stands for winner. It is our secret sign, letting me know that you are part of that incredible group who does not just skim the surface, but stays for the whole truth. If you found value in this story, please hit that like button and do not forget to subscribe so we can keep sharing these journeys together. Take care of yourselves. Set your boundaries.